another big shift was that they no longer wanted or required you to have a diagnosis of body or gender dysphoria in order to consider to be a candidate for hormones and or surgery. And that was a really unique shift because it was more or less presenting that this is now a choice. This isn't even a pathology. This is just someone saying it, and now you're signing off on that. And that was when I was like, oh, okay. So I thought that everyone who was identifying as that was acknowledging at some level something was going on with them that was atypical, and this is the way they were treating it. But no, this is what now it's this is what I am, and you're just a part of that affirmation to get there.
Hello, and welcome to the program Woke Up, where we hear the stories of those who had given themselves to today's ideologies and realized that there was things going on and it was taken them to a place that they did not want to be, and they felt like they wanted to change. And so today, this show is a must share. If you know anybody who is struggling, that's in the trans community or the queer community, any parents or family affected making big decisions, please share this because we have a really important and special guest. And the guest we have is a woman who has dedicated her life, her professional career, starting at the after she got her graduated and received her master's degree in family therapy, and starting at the age of 22, began to give her life's energy to helping those that struggled with gender identity, transsexuality, and has built her career on this and built her career out of empathy, compassion, love, and really trying to help people to become whole. And it must be a horrible thing for a human being to feel like they were born in the wrong body. I don't know what that's like, and I can only have empathy for those that struggle with that. So that's a real issue.
Mm-hmm.
And based on the culture today and what's happened in that industry, our guest is Sara Stockton, who is who owns a family psychology clinic. She's a social worker. She has a beautiful practice in Syracuse. And starting at the age of 22, today she's going to talk about and share with us what's happened in the profession, the incredible changes that have taken. And Sara comes at this from a really good place, a really good heart, not casting any accusations at all, but just simply saying, look, there's certain things that have changed in our delivery of healthcare, or mental health care and physical health care to people that are struggling. And she's going to share today about some of the titanic shifts that have happened sociologically and the unintended consequences. And so, Sara, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on, and welcome and hello to you in Syracuse.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. One of the things I do think is really important to touch upon, like you said in the beginning, is I really spend a lot of time thinking about the fact that I don't struggle with body dysphoria or gender dysphoria. And like you said, I have no idea what that might feel like or what exactly their struggles are, but I have struggled with different mental health issues at times and medical issues. So I think the importance of being well informed and having doctors that you can trust and being in a field that you can understand is really important, no matter what we're talking about here. And that's, I think, what really made me to start considering if I should speak out more and discuss what's going on in this profession, in this world, what's going on with our kids. And one thing I just want to correct is that I'm a marriage and family therapist, not a social worker. We're very similar in what we do, but that's just an important note. I don't want social workers to be upset with me.
Oh, thank you. I said corrected. Thank you.
Yes.
So when you started about at the age of 22, what was going on in your heart, and what was your affinity and your high level of empathy to get into this business of helping people along these lines?
Yeah, so I mean, in grad school, you definitely start thinking about perhaps any specialties that you might consider a niche or any populations that of our interest to work with. In Syracuse, I there was a good LGBT queer community here, and I think that is something that is a part of this community, as well as interest in, human sexuality. That was definitely something that I was interested in with wanting to help couples and families. So there was a group that was already developed in the grad program that was known to help adults who transsexuals receive hormone treatment, starting with a mental health assessment that we would start considering what would that look like if we were to start assessing children for interventions at a younger age. So, I mean, I had a mentor, she was my supervisor. That was a big part of my interest in that. And I kind of, with her leadership and many of my colleagues, we continued to research that and develop an assessment to help children in the clinic with that.
And so why don't you share like the transition of time and leading us up to today, like some of the things that you were observing and some of the successes and also some of the things that brought you cognitive dissonance and certain levels of discouragement that you think we need to begin to look at better as a society?
Yeah, I mean, so if you looked at the assessment that I helped develop, I mean, it was systemic in nature, meaning that we wouldn't just be assessing the child's voice only. So you would be bringing in parents, family members, school collaboration, medical collaboration to really discuss if this youth and their family were prepared for the journey up ahead, and to acknowledge and evaluate what's going on now, because most of these children obviously present with an underlying diagnosis of anxiety or depression. And so this assessment would probably, like I stated before, take about 2 years to complete. When you would be asking, you kind of would ask the children's questions, then you would ask the adults questions to see if the stories kind of match up and what's going on. I think one of the biggest shifts that happened was when Planned Parenthood started offering hormones to adolescents and to adults. Therefore, there wasn't really the need for as of a comprehensive assessment to get these hormones, right? And already we're starting to enter
And
now the world.
what was the time frame of that shift with Planned Parenthood? Just so we have a context of the year about
2010.
Okay.
2010 and 2012 is going to be the passing of the Affordable Care Act, right? Like that's when we're going to now start getting financial reimbursement for hormone blockers. So you have to understand, one of the unique parts in the beginning is that when I started this with youth, these weren't necessarily even approved under your health insurance. Therefore, there was limits to what parents could perhaps afford this. So the treatment was not as accessible in that kind of realm, right? It was just special insurances. It wasn't always Medicaid, right? But as that starts to shift, that really opens up the doors for a lot more people to seek these services.
Okay, so then what happens from 2012 coming forward that you see?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, well, first of all, I think as the care starts to increase, right, we have more and more kids identifying at schools. And so that in itself, I think, let me just give you an example. If I'm in a small school, there was one person identifying as trans. Within 5 years in that same grade, you would probably have 2 to 3. Okay. And so, and again, I don't want to contribute this all to a social contagion, but that is about how uncommon it was at one point, and then all of a sudden, within a couple of years, every school had to be prepared for this and be able to do the shifts. I mean, when I first started, going into a school and asking them to change someone's documents and their records was unheard of. Like, what do you mean? You're going to have us go to the document building and change the name, like that was a no. And what we really did was we sort of threatened the schools. Now, okay, if the student has a mental disorder and we have a diagnosis, and if the diagnosis says that you need to call this person by this name and you don't, you are actually you're in the HIPAA violation because you're not providing assurances according to the medical diagnosis. So with that sort of threat, that changed the school's way of coming across quickly. They magically were able to figure out how to change documentation fast. And then, you know, I think the community just continued to get larger, the online presence, the ability to have groups, right? And then the sheer amount of training. So when I went to school to become a therapist in the Syracuse area at one time, there was maybe 4 of us that were able to write the letters and were able to assess people. Within 4 years, there was no specialized training per se. You could arguably graduate with no discussion around this at all. And what I mean by that, like if you went to a Christian university, you're not really going to be introduced to queer theory as much as you would potentially in another graduate program, but yet you would still be able to be competent enough to write a letter to have these children not only just start hormones, but get surgeries as well.
For children under 18, right?
Yeah, and that was also a big shift too, was like you have to understand what my job was determined by what WPATH decided, right? So if WPATH, the World Association for Transgender, decided that it was a year of therapy before you have surgery, then that's what it was, right? If they decided you need a letter, because you basically use the same letter for hormones as you would for the name change as you would for a surgery, you just change the words.
Okay, and we'll keep going. You're doing great. Just keep telling us a story. We'll just edit this pause out. So you're doing wonderful.
Yeah. So I mean, I think what happened too. So now, keep in mind, every single person now was able to be a trans specialist, right? Where I spent my first couple years, 5 years, right? I would travel the country. I would teach medical professionals how to have their practice be more gender affirming. We didn't call it that back then, but just, you know, more suitable for transgender patients. So I would go to GYN offices, primary care, right? And give them continuing education and really helping the surgeons that are working on this. So you have to understand, I'm working with the surgeon who has, you know, done the first 10 ever chest surgeries, right, on youth. So as that gets larger and larger, there's just so many of us. Then I see things kind of start to shift, right? So we have then the passing of gay marriage that became into federal law, and therefore what you need to fundraise for the Human Rights Campaign now switched to transgender rights. So that became the top news, that there was a lot of violence, there was a lot more, you know, suicide threats. Again, one of the things that they threaten now, you know, if you don't let this happen to our youth, that they're going to commit suicide. That was not something I was taught in 2008, nor did I ever utter those words to any parent. I never needed to even suggest that that would be a way that there's nothing in the world that I should have to say that I'm going to problem solve by committing suicide. That's the lowest level of problem solving, and I would never say that. So that kind of shift, the wrong body shift, and then really the they, entering the they non-conforming. Now, I mean, we've always understood the androgyny and the gender bending, like that wasn't something unheard of, but a lot of confusion within the community. You know, my friends who identify as trans with, you know, they doesn't connect to what's happening. So I just started to realize that it was getting a lot more broad than I understood, and whoever was in control was not the mental health professionals anymore.
So how about the term like non-binary? When did that become part of your vernacular?
Oh, that's definitely more of a recent thing. I would say, you know, like in the last 5 years.
So it wasn't the professionals on the ground like yourself and the handful of others that were highly trained and highly skilled. It seems like there was other forces on top of setting policy and direction and setting the tone for everything that's going on right now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I don't think my field has anything to do with it anymore. I mean, there, like I stated, and some people that might be listening haven't heard me on Jordan Peterson, but I think when I started to also have concerns and realize that that was not going to be heard, there isn't really assessing anymore. I don't know if you follow Project Veritas, but Project Veritas in the last couple of days have released a lot of videos of going undercover at gender clinics in New York State, and them just being like, oh yeah, it might just be one session because we really don't want to act as the gatekeepers for this. And I remember being told that and thinking I don't want to be the gatekeepers, but at the same time, like, if we aren't, who is, and who is going to help these youth with what's going on with them in these families. And so I guess another big shift was that they no longer wanted or required you to have a diagnosis of body or gender dysphoria in order to consider to be a candidate for hormones and or surgery. And that was a really unique shift because it was more or less presenting that this is now a choice. This isn't even a pathology. This is just someone saying it, and now you're signing off on that. And that was when I was like, oh, okay. So I thought that everyone who was identifying as that was acknowledging at some level something was going on with them that was atypical, and this is the way they were treating it. But no, this is what I am, and you're just a part of that affirmation to get there.
And so you personally would sign off on things that were basically new policies. Is that correct?
No, I wouldn't sign off on new policies. Primarily, I would be signing off that people would be ready to start hormones and or be able to receive surgery for their affirmed gender.
And what types of, like, in the last 10 years would you say, in terms of exponential growth, are we talking? Is it along all ages and lines, or mostly teens or younger or older people too? Or like what's kind of going on in the demographics of all that?
So, I mean, I think it's obviously difficult for me to talk about it and as demographics for sure, right? Because you got to assume that I guess I'm only going to be witness to people that are struggling, right? So maybe I don't see everyone. I do work in a university setting, so I've had a little bit of an opportunity to see what kind of shifts have happened there. I would say that overall, there's a general sense of an increased around, I think, every age group around considering gender identity and gender expression, right? So I hear now more than ever, for example, gay men who are older and who have been very comfortable being gay men just saying casually, well, maybe I should be a woman because it would be easier, right? And I don't think 10 years ago, they would even conceptualize that as a thought right now. So now people are thinking about it. Again, I have parents that are coming in and tell me before their kids are born that, if my kid becomes a male one day, even though they were born female, like I would be able to accept that. And that's just something unique that as parents, we have to consider that ahead of time if we would be accepting of that. So, I am seeing it increased across the board, and just using hormones as a treatment for mental health is not totally uncommon anyways, but with the youth it's dramatically different. So when I was doing this again, I would say, okay, the youngest I had seen and worked with was 10, but that was very, very rare. And the typical ages that were coming in to see me would be like 14, 15, the 14 and 15 age. Now, when I'm hearing it, like, for example, my son's school, that there is a lot, and again, I don't know what a lot means, but of people identifying as a different gender in grade 5. I'm a little bit concerned because at grade 5, there's no puberty blockers, there's no medical intervention. So there's just affirming by name, but we are alluding to kids that this is more than just a name change. This is actually like some sort of biological difference.
Isn't there also like a high percentage of young people that begin to socially present at a young age? Then they're very open to taking the puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones. Isn't that like a natural trajectory that that kids go on to?
Yes, and I think that was another alarming part, is that obviously kids were starting to come in. They already know the steps. So yeah, I'm coming to see you so you can write me the letter for surgery. It's not like it's not even, we're going to consider this. Do we think it's the right way? This is the only way that we're doing it. So yeah, I mean, that's another difficult part about this is, just even seeing what's going on now when people are so scared that all of their care is going to be taken away from them. Just that they've been presented as like, this is the only option to be better. So if I struggle with this, they take away my ability to get hormones, then forget it. And the scary thing about the world is no matter what, like you could get a medical diagnosis. I have a blood disorder. I can't take hormones of any sort. So, if you have what happens later in life, if you're unable to take one of your medical interventions, does that mean you're no longer what you say you are? So that's what's the scary part about this as well.
Do you find like a lot of, let's just say teenagers in that demographic, they come in and like they've almost been prepped. They know what to say because they've got it in their mind that they want to get on hormones or puberty blockers, that they know exactly what to say. For instance, like at the southern border, a lot of immigrants that are crossing over that want to have access to America, they apply for asylum and they say that, and they're already prepped by NGOs or lawyers saying, yes, I feel for my life and safety. And then the government just has to rubber stamp that and let them come in as asylum seekers. And so that's all pretty well documented and organized. And you find like oftentimes the kids are pretty well informed and they know exactly what to say. Like, I've struggled with this my whole life. I always felt like I was born in the wrong body. And they almost have like a little speech, or parents that encourage this, or do you, or is it like you're able to do a real fair deep dive and a deep assessment?
No, I think at one point, like in the beginning, yeah, we could do a deep dive and an assessment. But no, very quickly, not only the letters were up online, so right, like the letter examples, so the kids knew exactly what to say and exactly how to present it. And I don't want to say it didn't matter, but I don't think there was a lot of emphasis on, hey, how are we going to watch for that, right? How are we assessing for the fact that they understand that, and where are they getting their information from? I mean, a big thing was you obviously would want people to be supported. So you would suggest support groups for kids, but in these support groups, they're telling the kids, okay, well, here's the surgeon that you're going to go to. Here's the next steps. And the only way to get there is doing it this way. So yes, I mean, there was often times where kids were annoyed with how slow it was going, right? And that was a little sad because they were aware that other people would have it faster. And so they would get frustrated if their parents were not as quickly to get on board.
Yeah. Have you heard about a place called the Tavistock Clinic in England? Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm assumed you would, but from what I read, that they saw an increase of 4,400% of young girls that wanted to do some kind of gender change or non-binary, and it was just like talking about that social contagion. Now they've shut down. It seems like other places, other countries, like in Europe, Sweden, and Finland, are taking a much more conservative approach. And it seems like America is just kind of like the Wild West with the administration of medicines and surgeries and stuff like that. Would you, I mean, how do you feel about what the steps are Europe's been taking, and what types of improvements do you think we should take as a society for our young people in particular?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've seen, for example, when I started and I was working with a youth endocrinologist, I would assume that that population was about 10% of her clientele. Now it's 100% and a waiting list, right? So these clinics, I think we're going to continue to find out that most of our hospitals perhaps would be in the red if we didn't have gender affirming surgeries and clinics around here. I live in New York State, so I'm already seeing a lot of talks about making this a sanctuary state, right? And the passings of a lot of legislation across, I think Montana passed something yesterday. So I think it's going to be this kind of legislative fight of banning these surgeries, but I think we're a little bit past that now because these people still need care. Now we have a lot of kids who are in like a third category, not kids, even adults who have a third category of who they are and what kind of treatment they're going to need. So I don't think it's going to be as simple as shutting them down.
So you sense that there's also somewhat of an economic agenda with the hospitals and perhaps big pharma as well.
Not somewhat.
Tell us about that more.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's somewhat, right? I mean, even one of the hardest things for me to see is that, and again, I'm not against people getting the care that they need, but in my own insurance through the state, if I had breast cancer, my chest reconstruction surgery would not be covered. Yet fully sex change surgeries are covered. Now we're talking about $80,000 or more for some of these surgeries. That is just wild. So the amount of money that these surgeons are making on that, I mean, the field of facial deconstruction or reconstruction, that is a completely new field, and that is one of the fastest growing fields in this realm. And some of these surgeons, the surgeons that do these top surgeries, that's all they do now. So I think we're going to be against a lot of doctors who are going to be out of business, and I don't think that's going to happen.
I am just annoyed with the euphemism top surgery. Let's just say it called for what it is. These doctors, their entire practice now is chopping off the breasts of healthy women of bearing age, childbearing age, and the consequences of that psychologically, who knows, hormonally, and it's all for economics, or I shouldn't say all, but incentivized greatly for economics. I just feel like I got kicked in the stomach. It's just so sad to think that these children that aren't even fully developed mentally, that can make these informed decisions, are now going to have the consequence for the rest of their lives, and
the consequence, and you're not wrong when you say that, but I also want to point out the financial money is really in the male to female, right? We're just starting to, so the top surgery, it's still not as financially beneficial as perhaps even getting chest surgery for males to females. And obviously bottom surgery for women is more commonly been done. Again, it's just much more recently where we're going to be reconstructing the penis, but I think that even speaks to our society and what our standards are. But you have to also keep in mind it's like a couple places in the United States that have these surgeons who are now teaching other surgeons. So this might be, I've been looking at these surgeons that are young, and this is like myself, the last 10 years and maybe all your life is this experience.
And that surgery is you take some tissue from your forearm, right? And they make a fake penis. Is that
or your leg?
And the penis doesn't really function like a real penis. And do you have the same supposed sexual pleasure that a biological man would, or I don't
know.
Forgive my ignorance about that.
No, it's more, that one is definitely more for, being able to pee standing up, some definitely more aesthetic looking, and there is going to be some sensation, but not the same. No.
What types of things do you think we should be doing, and how should we approach this social contagion? coupled with real issues, the economics involved. What can we do better from your professional experience, and what would you like to see implemented, and how can we change?
Yeah, I think this is difficult because part of me wants to fear that we're going to have to really fight it before we can change it, right? I would like to, in a perfect world, I would say, okay, we need to go back to really good training of what we're doing here and what gender dysphoria is, what body dysphoria is, what being a certain gender is. Just connect, if we are being so free with gender, then why is it so connected to medical procedures? I think we need to have a lot more safeguards for children in terms of what the informed consent is. I mean, just to get gastric bypass, I know people who have been denied, right? And that is really like a life-saving surgery. If you're talking about life-saving that, gastric bypass does, they don't even have to watch a video, right? They don't even have to talk about the complications. There's no surgeries that I've had that I don't have to really consider what's going to happen later in life. So I think that informed consent, we need to be screaming about that. I think mental health professionals have to be really concerned about what they're signing off on. This is the only medical treatment I sign off on in my whole field that I'm allowed to. It's the only one. And why? So why am I allowed to sign off on someone's genitals, but nothing else is relevant to me? And I also have no assessment criteria in order to do that.
And what about the parents of young people that are affected by this? It seems like their rights have been neutered, and they suffer, and they must affirm, or they're hateful, and there's a entire grieving process in the family, not just moms and dads, but siblings and grandparents. And I mean, this gender, somebody as your granddaughter, or your grandson, and you have to learn a new language, or you're a hater. I mean, what kind of psychological things do you see that are problematic that as a result of these policy shifts and this cultural shift for the family and loved ones of your patients?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say to remind parents, and I think it took me getting to the last couple of years to actually really understand the value of this, but we have to start thinking about the way we talk to our kids more about our bodies in general. We talk about body positivity, but there really isn't a lot about body positivity. I have clients who have introduced me to, and this might be gross for some of your listeners, like free bleeding during their period and how much they are connecting to their mother nature, to who they are, right? And we're not teaching children, particularly or young women, about the process that their body is going through, and it's a beautiful process, and how we need to trust our bodies. Instead, it's bad, let's give them birth control, let's deny every single thing that's going on to them. And it's not surprising to me why we're so disconnected to what's going on. So I think we have to be really aware of like celebrating femalehood, manhood. And I know that sounds cliche or maybe uncomfortable for some, but if we don't get back to like accepting who we are, it's going to be dangerous. I would say too is that you have to have conversations with our kids young, right? I've had to have conversations with my son at 10 and my daughter who's 6 around what is happening, and that what it means to be a female and what it means to be a male, and that what we're witnessing is someone presenting as, because I think that's the biggest differentiation. We cannot just say this person is, because that's very confusing to young kids. So the way we talk about it, and I think with families, with this, the grieving process is real, right? And being able to there's a culture that I don't think parents realize going on in our schools that is teaching our kids to not trust your parents, and that they're abusive, and that you need to cut off and you don't need them. And so just knowing, being able to talk to your kids around what values is important, and what, no matter what they're doing, being able to stand in that, the implications of that. If someone's saying, okay, Mom, I want to identify as something else, then okay, you have to be able to sit with me and talk about the grief of that. When parents were going through this, we would bring in, for example, pictures of this kid, because we're going to have to talk about, are we allowed to have pictures of this child up when they look like a different sex than what they are now? How does that make you feel? And I came from the place that we need to be able to accept this at some level, right? Either this isn't a bad part of your past. This still got you to where you are. And if you can't even see that, and we're living in a denial that's not good for anyone. So I think the process of really grieving and acknowledging what's happening is important.
Yeah, and also the concept of gender affirming care, and everyone needs to spring to attention and salute family, friends, bosses, all society, the medical community, the mental health community. When one person gets in their mind, this is my gender, without looking at all the other things, all the other underlying conditions, the history, and everybody needs to follow that and to support that. Otherwise, it's not loving, it's not affirming, it's hateful. And then they're subject to the whim of, oh, I change that again in a few years, especially when you're dealing with young people who change so quickly. I mean, I was a young boy. My first love. I was 16 years old. I thought I was going to marry this girl. I was totally in love, and then we broke up. And then a year later, I'm like, why did I love that girl so much? I couldn't understand it. I mean, that's part of being a teenager and developing, but everyone's got to get in line because of the pressures that are going on within a young person's mind, so.
Well, not even just pressures. I mean, think about their programming. And sometimes I have a lot of empathy. I was, at a concert, and I saw someone collapse over, and one of my friends went up to them, and it was like, she was unconscious, and is she okay? And their friend snapped back and said, it is not a she, they go by they. And this person was unconscious, and we had to correct the correct pronoun usage. And it was almost like it was so innate in them. And I'm like, if that's the level in which you're going around the world, I mean, think about how potentially traumatized our children are, and just how hypervigilant they're walking around, and just all the time thinking, oh my gosh, if I'm misgendered, what does that mean if someone doesn't understand? And I had one of my friends, she's in her 70s, she told me she was just watching episodes of people that are presenting as, like a male with a dress on with a beard, so she could get used to seeing very different looking people, so she wouldn't be surprised anymore. And I said, so you're watching videos of that? And she's like, yeah, so I'm not don't have any more reactions anymore. I'm like, wow, so we're really like programming ourselves to be okay. I mean, I've pretty much learned the art of not addressing anybody by name or pronouns. And like I tell people, I'm not going to tell you how to speak about me behind my back. So that's the only reason why you need to know my pronouns, is if you're going to talk about me behind my back.
Oh, so you don't say she, her, or they, them pronouns about yourself. You don't get into that?
No, because I don't need to tell you how to talk about me when I'm not around.
Interesting. Well, that's logical. Mm-hmm. And I got a question for you. As far as the young people, say under 25, 23 or whatever, in the Syracuse area, what would you say are the percentage of the gender dysphoric, I'll just use that word, that you would see would be Caucasian?
95.
95. And so let's be clear, there's the demographics according to 2020, Syracuse has 49-50% Caucasian and about 30% African American, and there's biracial and 7 or 8% Hispanic. And so there's something going on there. I mean, any statistician that's worth their salt would say, why in the white community is this so prevalent and not so much in other demographics? And this is not being racist. This is just talking about demographics that the United States Census takes every year. So there's something in the demographic of Caucasians throughout the United States of America. I mean, this isn't necessarily happening globally, Africa, Asia, South America. This is a Western phenomenon kind of like
Correct.
bulimia or anorexia. Uh, I, I I think we really need to look at some of this stuff as a society. You know.
Yes, if I mean, I would forget Syracuse. If I would bet if we looked at the numbers of surgeries and broke it down by race, that it would be exceedingly Caucasian. And I've thought a lot about this, and my concern is our obsession of identity, and then our obsession with not liking our identity. So if you are a straight white male, when we do that class where we talk about who am I, you feel pretty bad. You know, there's not a lot of benefits to that. And we're not even, I think with the internet, and because, we're not even a friend anymore. Like I was thinking about growing up and who was I at 12, right? I was a sister, I was a daughter, but I was a friend. I was a student. Like we don't teach people like friendships, because friendships are so different now with our kids, because online, everyone is a possible friend or not, right? There's no need to have this like value. So I'm going to have to find my value in a group. Now, the group of being white, they're shooting up schools. They're doing this, right? So I do think there's an emphasis of like, okay, also, do I like that group? Again, children are asking me like, how do I know I'm male? How do I know I'm female? Because I don't really feel like I am like that female. So just this even belief that means something different is damaging to our children, for sure.
Yeah, and you were saying, I'm just going to get back to the surgery part. You were saying that it's overwhelmingly white in the surgery, but you also said as a result of the Affordable Care Act, there's been a change, and part of that mandates that everyone gets insurance, and these insurance companies cover this. So for the DEI radicals, it would say, oh, it's white privilege and Black people can't afford gender affirming care like the white kids can. No, that's not the case, because if an African American would like to do that, their insurance company would cover it under the Affordable Care Act. Is that correct?
Yes, and I would state that my assumption is that culturally, the other groups are not accepting, but it's just not going to come up as quickly, right? And I am getting calls from different countries now that's saying more and more people are struggling with this. But I think some of the families that would be from a different culture here, that cultural tie, this ambiguous gender assignment, is not something that they're growing up in.
Yeah, so just logically, there's a social contagion going here amongst our younger Caucasian people that needs to be looked at on a profound level. So
absolutely.
I got a couple more questions in your practice. Like you've seen transitions, you've seen you've been involved with this. What would you say were your biggest mistakes? Like everybody makes mistakes. I'm not looking for you to disclose too much, but like, what do you think the way you're viewing this, and what would you do different today than you were 5-10 years ago, based on all this career versus this career's worth of experience and knowledge and analysis? What were the mistakes that you made?
So, I thought about this a lot, and I think about it a lot, and I don't know if I would say there was really mistakes, right? Because I think I've tried to correct those mistakes a lot, if there was any, right? So just being really upfront with clients about what this process looks like, the process of therapy at all at my practice, not just gender affirming care, right? Just therapy in general is going to look similar in some level, regardless of what your presenting issue is. One of the biggest things that I don't think I knew enough about back then, nor maybe could I, and even if I did, would I be able to do anything about it, is the medications and this long-term side effects and what was really going on. I mean, as much as it's not my job to, right? There's no other medications. I mean, I have a sense of antidepressants and what's going on. But again, I get a lot of continuing education on that. But the drugs that I more or less saying was okay, I was told by communities there's no side effects. So in 2008, when I wrote that, like the puberty blockers, it was irreversible and had no side effects. well, that's just medical. That doesn't make any sense that there would be nothing wrong with pausing puberty. We found out there's cognitive difficulties, there's potential bone density issues. So I think being able to know how to talk more about that, but I don't know if that would have mattered because again, at some point they came in and that was just the answer, and that's what's happening.
Now, isn't a lot of that stuff off label and it's not even approved by the FDA?
Correct. Yeah, the FDA, they're not approved. I mean, and which, to be fair, some drugs that we take are not approved. A lot of, even some of the drugs we experiment on with kids with antidepressants are not completely approved for children use. And, it's up to your discretion. But these parents aren't really being taught that there's any other option.
And what percent of the patients would you say have comorbid psychological problems such as ADHD or depression or other things that are running parallel?
Every single one.
So,
Sorry, every single one.
Wow. And so a frontline treatment isn't that. Let's talk about gender.
Correct. And not only that, I mean, again, when I started, that was really significant was the treatment of other illnesses. I mean, many of my letters would state with the caveat that I would recommend that they start this under the supervision of remaining in psychotherapy to, again, deal with the implications. There's no required help after you get all these surgeries that are life-changing, right? And this changes everything for the rest of your life, how you have to interact with the world. And my fear is that there isn't a great deal of knowledge and help on that. And not to mention what I'm getting introduced to now is the detransitioners and what they feel like they're doing to the community and the help that they don't have and the hate that they receive.
Yeah, they're just TERFs, right? they never really were trans. And
sure, that's a term that I've been introduced to as
me. Oh, me too. I'm learning a whole new language in the last couple of years.
Right.
Yeah, you had hit on the misgendering thing, and I've seen that people are so, not everybody, but I just see a heightened level of agitation about being misgendered. Like, for instance, we had that tragedy in Nashville where there was that woman who was taking testosterone to present as a man, and then she ended up being bitter toward her school, and there was just a tragic shooting, and then people were angry and agitated, not so much for the victims, but that the police would dare to misgender a biological female. And that just seems weird. It seems like some of this stuff, or the use of dead names, it's what's the root of all that from your perspective, the heightened sense of aggression and agitation and cutting off relationships because of being misgendered and hating people over that? I mean, it seems extreme.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, some of this, again, I think reminds me of really cultish religious people, right? The dead name, for example, that was not a terminology that I learned, and I just heard that more recently with obviously the Jordan Peterson thing. But that's really scary to call it a dead name. Like, we're more or less normalizing suicide. So, and that's my fear about this, is that if we can just kill a part of ourselves, right, that part is dead. That's wild. And we're reincarnated, or we're the spirit of, right, this new being. And so you have parents who are, again, getting told if I'm not able to change my language right away, we're not going to speak, not acknowledging that it's going to be tough to believe someone's dead that is right in front of your eyes. And so I tell people, like, this is almost like a religion, because it only exists if you believe it to exist, and if the external tells you it does. And that's why you have to practice your faith every single day. They have to present it. They have to meditate on it. They have to bring it into the world. And if someone doesn't acknowledge what they don't see, they turn them away.
And some of this can't be healthy for the person themselves, in that if somebody's slow to get on board with their transition process or presentation, or the new them, or the self-identification, there's a tendency to just cut off those relationships, whether they be family or close friends or the historic record. And it's like they erase their entire background, or people that could help support them and truly do love them. I think that can't be good for mental health. Grieving the loss of relationship concurrent with the physiological changes going on.
No, and I think my fear is this too. Like, if there's not a lot of empathy for a parent, then there's something going on if you expect that, from your own parent. And I really think what's happening here is, regardless if your child is transitioned, I don't think they're even picking up on the fact that you don't accept them. It's the fact of you are the example of what they don't accept about themselves. So if I'm looking at my father, then that is something, right? Like, I am my father. At one point I was my father's daughter. So I have to, ignore that. How does one know how to be that father's son? So sometimes I don't think it's the parents' problem. It's more or less the kid's problem. Like, I don't know how to be this person's son now. And that's where it gets really weird, because I'm like, what are you asking your parents for? Because there's names, right? Okay, that's my daughter. But I think sometimes we're talking about is like, you can sense that your family or someone isn't buying into your reality, into your world. And that's probably true. I mean, we can identify someone with any name or switch it, but you give birth to your child, like, regardless, it's still your child.
Yeah, it's a whole family issue, isn't it? It seems like this is a big deal. It's not just the person and the patient, what they're going through, but are they being instructed properly that, look, this is a big deal. This might be how you feel. Maybe you'll change your mind in a few years, but this is going to have huge impact on your entire history, your childhood friends, your cousins, your grandparents, your siblings. Is there? It just seems like there should be much more education about physiological, emotional, social presentation, like you're referring to. Oftentimes, the social anxiety that goes along with the transition. It just seems like this is a massive, massive change, and it seems like this agenda is so quick, so strong to alleviate or to gratify the person struggling in the moment without really a strong contemplation of long-term consequences in their own lives and their social network, and this transition from family and friends that you've known your entire life to a quote unquote glitter family as your principal caregivers, which is much more transitory,
And it causes them to not want to connect with, their childhood friends or anyone. Because again, it's not just if the next friend accepts it, it's, can you accept that your friendship with that person was all connected to your dead name? And that's why I think people are more and more likely to cut off, not because they're mad, but because they don't know how to accept it within themselves. And I think it's because they're not getting good care. They're getting, next day you're this, instead of, no, when something goes on, you walk through that with someone. If someone gets a cancer diagnosis, like, loses their hair, or your identity might shift in that, like, someone's walking with you, you're explaining to them. You're not just walking into the room and saying, I have cancer, no, deal with it, don't look at me funny, don't have any fear around it, don't be sad. Like, that's just not loving. That's not a reasonable thing to ask.
This is so complicated. What's your sense in terms of the general macro trend in our society? For instance, I know that there's a political movement, I don't know, 20 quote unquote red states have put in certain levels of legislation slowing down this train. Other quote unquote blue states, as you're saying, are opening up as sanctuary states. And so there's that political battle on state levels. But in terms of the societal shift or the societal, is this accelerating? Is this freight train just growing in magnitude, or do you sense that there's certain sociological forces, other voices such as you today, or detransitioners, or other psychological people, psychiatrists and medical professions that are saying, hey, we just have to take a chill pill? Or is this saying just an out of control freight train, and God only knows where it's going to end up.
I mean, I'm hoping, I think it's going to be a little bit of both. I mean, what I would say is we have to speak up, and I'm hesitant of, I'm not exactly the PTO type, right? That's not exactly where this is the right place. And Board of Education isn't exactly the right place. But when you find out what your kid's being taught in school, it's alarming, and we got to address it. So I think parents being a little bit more a part of what's going on in schools is going to be important. Getting back to the community, professionals having to talk about it. Yeah, I think being able to kind of have an agreement that, like you said, it has to be with empathy and care for common sense. This isn't about hate or denying what's going on. We need voices. We need the endocrinologists. We need the surgeons. We really need the medical professionals. I'm very surprised with the lack of speaking out from that group, pediatricians. And I mean, I can imagine it's fear, and the fear that your family and your friends and your job will be taken away.
I think you're right, because I think these highly trained professionals that know better, there's definitely likely an ethos whereby they don't want to be take the risk, and I think it's just going to take people like yourself and others to give everybody courage to speak the truth, and not just swallow it, and not just, okay, I'm going to protect my own interests. There comes a point in a man and woman's life where you have to do duty for society and for other people, and not just protect your own emotional and psychological well-being, but have the courage to speak the truth and deal with the consequences. Some will get canceled, some will get fired, some will be slandered in the most vicious ways. But it's going to take some people just stepping up to get to a place of real dialogue, real debate, real policy that's based on what's best for for everybody, versus just we only do gender affirming care, and we cut out the parents, we cut out everybody else, and we're going to do this, and there's got to be doctors that say that are compromised within their own soul.
I can't
think they'll know.
imagine. I can't imagine. I watch them, these young surgeons talking about it, and just, oh, I do, hundreds of surgeries a day. And I think that's one of the things that really scares me the most, is the amount of people that are probably going to end their life because of that, these detransitioners that are speaking out. And what I can only imagine, the amount of people that are like, listen, I've gone this far, right? Like, I've done things and I've been like, okay, I'm this far in, like, how can what else am I supposed to do? Some of these kids have convinced themselves like this was the answer. And if it isn't, then what? Right. So I've had to, have difficult conversations with people of like, you were presented as this is the cure, and what if it's not? And that is just so scary. And I know there's people out there that are afraid that they made the wrong decision, but going backwards is uncharted territory. And what will be the acceptance, right? And we sold that, oh, it's reversible. It's not true.
And do you have any idea, like, the long-term effects on a lot of these drugs, or are we still discovering? Are we still playing doctor?
Yeah, I mean, we're still playing doctor. I mean, I've done some research. What's sad is that, when I want to post research, there's very limited research in the United States, right? And which is wild that they're not connecting with people afterwards, long-term care. But in other countries, we're definitely seeing cardiovascular problems. We know with hormone use, like I said, I do IVF, and they let 6 months of any hormones is, your risk of cancer goes up exponentially. So we're talking 15, 20, 30 years on hormones. There's impact. And if COVID didn't make you think about it, you're relying on the pharmaceutical companies. You lose your insurance. We lose shipment to getting your hormones one day. There's going to be a lot of complications. So a lot of these people are the first ever to try this. We're doing internal implants now for hormones, and that's ultimately going to cause cancer. But I would have conversations with people like, if that meant 15 years of the life, would you rather live that? And a lot of people said yeah.
Yeah, and please forgive my ignorance. I'm just going to use common sense here. The human system on the cellular level, from our mitochondria, our bone structure, our plasmas in our blood, our hormones, our proteins, there's an entire massive system, and even the smartest amongst us is still limited in the knowledge of the complexity of the human body, the brain, and how everything works. And to me, it's just logical sense, by introducing 15 to 20 times amount of testosterone into a female biological body, which might, you know, provoke more masculinity and facial hair and changes in voice and to present more masculine. There has to be on a small level, maybe what you're saying, the increase in cardiovascular problems or cancers, other unintended consequences that we're just beginning to learn about too, and vice versa. If we're introducing too much estrogen, it just seems like the male and female hormonal and how we're designed. And I'm speaking totally out of ignorance, just guessing. There's much more nuance and complexity than just an introduction of one particular hormone.
Oh, absolutely. Not to mention, I mean, if you talk to people, phantom pains of, they're not being taught that. The people might have phantom pains of where their breasts used to be, for the rest of their life. Yeah,
Mm.
definitely being disconnected later in life, not understanding what that does hormonally. Again, you're going to rely on the pharmaceutical companies for the rest of your lives. And I guess I'm a little surprised about how many people are willing to be like that. I mean, taking medication and requiring that to be who you are, it's no small thing.
Yeah, voluntarily. Well, Sarah, you are an absolutely beautiful soul. You're my
Mhm.
sister. You're my friend, and I really admire you. I deeply respect you, and may God bless you and your family and prosper you, give you wisdom for the future, and may you be a fruitful and effective voice for policy
Mhm.
changes to truly help people. Because I know that your heart, you're filled with compassion and empathy. That's why you've been in the profession you've been in. That's why you're helping families. And so it's an honor for me that you would take the time and come on our
Mm.
show. And so I'd like you to give the last word of exhortation and encouragement to particularly people that are going through this and or families that are
Mm.
struggling and loved ones, to give everybody hope and how people might contact you if or
Mhm.
your practice.
Mhm.
But thank you so much. And we are all really blessed that you would take the
Mm.
time to be on the show. And so you have the last word.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Yeah, I would say keep reaching out. I mean, people can find me on my Twitter, Sara Stockton, find my practice. I also would just say for parents to really know that people are there out there, and there's groups like Jen Spack that want to help parents, and a lot of other countries are being the example of this, and I hope to continue that. But I would expect for people to continue to look out for groups that are going to be there to support families no matter where they are. If you're in it, just trying to take it day by day with your kids and teaching them what's going on in their body, and that no matter what, like, that's what they're going to be left with, and externally that only so much can do something to change the internal, and that there's nothing wrong with who they are and no one's born wrong. That's
Mm.
a big one.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And you have a
Mm.
good day and really appreciate you. Have a big hug.
All right, you too, thank you.
Okay.